Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College at 90.3 WHPC. Also streaming on the iHeart and the iTunes app. You can actually see us and hear us on nccradio.org. And of course, today we can be seen, see us on the Facebook of Rabbi Perl or WHPC. In fact, just to prove that I'm in the studio, I'm waving to you. I'm waving. Yes, I see you. I see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. So hi there. My name is Rabbi Perl. A shout out to Kyle. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends on when you are listening or watching. Today we're going to have a kind of what I would call a diversified program, because we're going to first talk about all this recent, what on everybody's mind is the USA classified documents and what we can learn from that. I'm also going to let you know a little bit of my, should I call it my pet peeve, that speaks somewhat about the broadening of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, how there's a problem by broadening and remembering more than the Holocaust in these celebrations and days of remembrance. I want to share with you some of the myths that we have about Judaism, and a little bit about a follow-up from last week's conversation about whether God has a form, if it's male or female or binary. A little bit on the importance of this coming Wednesday, Yud Shvat, the 10th day of Shvat on the Jewish calendar. This is an important date on the Jewish world of celebration. It was in 1951, when the Rebbe, the Lubavitch Rebbe, assumed his leadership and the significance and the impact of his life on all of us. And then we're going to talk a little bit about can God create a rock that he can't lift up? And so stay tuned, everybody. And welcome to everyone. Good morning to Gene Brandonston and everybody else out there. And I'm going to give another wave and a shout out. I promised if I saw you watching, I would wave. So here I am. I'm waving to everybody out there in WHPC land and on our Facebook page as well. So first of all, this Saturday morning, this past Shabbos morning, I did something out of ordinary that you typically would not see rabbis do. When I got up to do my little sermon, and I pulled up a big placard, a big piece of foam board, and on there had the words declassified, confidential, and everybody, of course, laughed and understood that there was something interesting that I was hopefully about to share. And indeed, in the United States, of course, classified documents is on everybody's mind almost daily. Comes out yet another revelation about this mishandling of state secrets, whether it's by presidents, both current and former, and others. It also generated a debate about the nature of classified documents. So in my synagogue, I had promised that I was going to reveal some classified information. And I, too, had that information, and that really is now available to everybody. So stay tuned. The whole idea of classified documents, why is so much classified? Let's just understand why are so many things classified. It would be fair to argue that anything which compromises and weakens national security, especially personnel and techniques, are legitimate secrets. Life and liberty are literally at stake. Then there is a low level of confidentiality in which procedures and policies are being protected. We can understand that as well. And then comes, of course, irrational secrecy, generally utilized to hide something. Politicians and governments have always felt safest when they control the narrative. Their survival as leaders depends on keeping things under wraps and beyond scrutiny. Now, this may work in dictatorships, but in democracies, citizens inevitably, as we see, push back, but with limited success. But then, as I shared with everybody on Shabbos, with the arrival of the digital revolution, now everything is being recorded in multiple mediums. Things are accessed, copied, forwarded at the blink of an eye. it's nigh impossible to keep things hidden for long. All around the world, that which was previously unknown is being rapidly exposed. A recent prime minister in one country was forced to resign when an image taken behind closed doors became public. Where it might have taken decades for a story to be revealed, no, in mere days or less, it's exposed. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. And that's where I enjoyed or salivated in sharing with everybody some state secrets that were revealed in the Torah readings of these weeks. And I want to say good morning to Linda Zellickson and also to Eitan Kilshevsky, who is always listening and will note any comments that. And I hope you have something to say about today. And what I'm trying to say, dear friends, is that it's so interesting that you have within the Bible, within the Torah portions, in recent weeks, when we read about the 10 plagues, we also find some state secrets that are declassified. How do we see this? There were, these 10 plagues that we learn about and repeat and learn about, they were preceded by a visit. What happened? That it wasn't just a dropping of these 10 plagues. Moses came to Pharaoh and he urged him to reconsider and release the Jewish people from his iron grip. They were being used and abused. For some of these visits, actually, there were 3 groups. The very first of each of these groups, Moses was instructed to meet Pharaoh early in the morning on the banks of the river Nile. All the other plagues either came without warning or they were presented. Moses come to the palace. That's where the king usually is. But interestingly, in 3 occasions, Moses goes down to the river Nile to meet Pharaoh. What is Pharaoh going down to the river Nile for? Why not meet him at the royal palace? Why at the river? And Rashi explains to us, because Pharaoh was an ultimate narcissistic individual. Like most leaders, he thought highly of himself. His ego was such that he considered himself a deity. And how did he explain himself? How did he present himself? He claimed to have godlike symptoms that he did not need to relieve himself. In simple language, he basically pretended he didn't need to go to the bathroom, that he had no waste. Of course, this was absurd. The myth itself was carefully cultivated and perpetuated. How was he able to do this? By himself, relieving himself early in the morning. He would go down to the river Nile and unload when he would not, where he would not be spotted, where his top secret was safe. It was classified information. Where does Pharaoh doesn't go to the bathroom? Nobody could know. But Torah tells us that the purpose of Moses' rendezvous with Pharaoh at the Nile was to puncture, was to declassify, to reveal this mirage, to bring Pharaoh down to earth, to expose his fraud, to demonstrate that he was not worthy of being a leader. Crushing this pompous arrogance was something the Egyptians themselves were about to experience as well. We all know that in preparation to leaving Egypt, they had to bring a special sheep or a Paschal lamb, a Pesach lamb, also known in Hebrew as the Korban Pesach, that each family was required to offer, and it was selected 4 days prior. One essential reason why the lamb also happened to be why this all happened is because the Egyptians looked at another form of deity was this. They would bow down and use the sheep as and the lamb as a deity. By taking the animal, the supreme symbol of Egypt, and offering it to God, this had an effect of destroying yet another false narrative, some secret information that now had to be revealed and declassified, which again had been carefully and painstakingly constructed and hidden from the world. So really, it was fascinating to me how in the Bible itself, someone, as in this case, the Pharaoh, tried to hide and keep secret, where he really was nothing more than a human being, that he, some sort of a deity, didn't need to go to relieve himself. This was, exposed to everybody. You see, true leaders have nothing to be embarrassed about and would have no need to hide their actions in some culture of secrecy. Remarkably, the true secret to a society which is free and pleasant is a society that is filled with honesty, truth, and altruism. They are also truly liberating. Very, very important for us to appreciate this. So again, thank you so much for all those joining us on the radio. This is Rabbi Perl. Thank you so much for all those joining us on Facebook. And please spread the word that we come here every Sunday with God's help from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. I'm coming to you from the studios of WHPC at Nassau Community College. And we have the opportunity to share ideas. And now let me go into another little subject. And I would, if I had the opportunity to highlight, it's the concept of broadening Holocaust commemorations. And I would like to say that joining us at this very moment is Karen Cohen Green, who helped solidify or crystallize the issue as we discussed this at our Shabbos collation, better known as Kiddush, also known as happy hours, right after davening. And that was the idea of, as you may well know, that yesterday, January 27th, not yesterday, that is on Friday, January 27th, marked the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And this is a special day, an appreciated day that was set by the United Nations to commemorate the Holocaust. And this was in conjunction with the date when the Soviet Union and the Russian army liberated the concentration camps back in 1945. So my thoughts today, which was amply explained by Karen, is that there's a how should I call it, a certain watering down, a certain misinformation, so to speak, when we broaden a Holocaust commemoration to include more than what that date was all about. So our question would be, is it appropriate to include in Holocaust gatherings and commemorations, to include all other groups and other inappropriate things that happen to different people over the times? So I want to say good morning to Barry Wall and Amy. Wow, thank you so much. And they're actually listening to us on ski boards. So what am I talking about? Well, if you really are up to date and have participated and read about particularly this Holocaust commemoration on January 25th, you will see different parliaments around the country, and even here in the United States, there's an effort to include more than just the Holocaust, to include other groups, whether it's the Nazi, beyond just Jewish people, other groups that they put down, and etc., with gypsies, etc. And I want to say up front that I absolutely support that there should be commemorative days and special days of pause and reflection when of any victims of any society. And that's very nice and very appropriate. But dear friends, what I'm sharing today is I honestly, sincerely believe they do not belong in a Holocaust commemoration day or gathering. Let me explain my position, or this position. You have to know why the Holocaust was unique. And any watering down of what that day represents by inclusion of others I would say, is borderline anti-Semitism. I'm not a Meshuggah, dear friends, but when you start to include everything, then nothing counts. The more you add, the more watered down it becomes. And that's the term that I want to thank Karen Green for helping express this. See, when you talk about the Holocaust, it was very unique. It was an attempt, basically, to eradicate Jewish people from the face of the earth. Again, let me emphasize, all genocides are atrocious. All supremacy is murderous, and all wars are costly. Yet, trying to exterminate the Jewish nation was worse than all other genocides and supremacies and wars ever, and that could be, God forbid. But why? Don't jump to conclusions, dear friends. Let me explain to you why. You see, Judaism gave birth to monotheism. Judaism gave birth to the concept of human equality. The whole idea of leaving Egypt, that people, human beings, should not be treated like slaves. And thereby, through Judaism, gave realistic options to polytheism, to supremacy, to classism, to oppression, to injustice, and to war. In fact, it started teaching a comprehensive vision for protecting the truth and the weak, overtaxing the powerful, the concept of equality for the law, and the importance to every man and woman and democracy, and I could go on. You see, Judaism helped lay the foundation of so much in so many aspects of the world, all the way down to political Europe, democracy, and other kinds of things. So what I'm trying to say is we must appreciate that when you talk about the Holocaust, which was determined to exterminate, God forbid, the Jewish people, it was not just a genocide of the other. It was not just a murder of one's fellow, but really of one's parent, the foundation of so much. That makes the Holocaust unprecedented. And we could go on and go into this in great detail, but it's important to appreciate that the general world is good and understands what it means, what the Holocaust really means on a deeper sense. And as you see today, we see today that unfortunately, after all that went on during the Holocaust, there's still many perpetrators that have not brought to justice. There's still needs a tremendous effort to clean up anti-Semitism from news reports, the arrogantly lecturing of Israel, and other things like this. So you must appreciate, speaking of which, when recently the UN decided to drag Israel to the long-term anti-Semitic International Court of Justice in The Hague, do you know how many European countries voted against that? 3. Can you imagine? Germany, Austria, and Italy. Seems that the Triple Alliance, so to speak, really had learnt their lesson. That is why the Holocaust should not be seen as just another genocide, just another racist attack on some innocent people, just another form of injustice. As long as anti-Semitism is as powerful as it is still today, there is no place, dear friends, to generalize the Holocaust. The first lesson of Auschwitz is acknowledge and stop anti-Semitism. Certainly I openly support, any group that has been discriminated against, the gypsies, trade unionists, the communists, all the things that the Nazis did. They went against the demented, the psychiatric patients, the crippled, and others were also mass murdered by Nazis. We recognize that. And, it took place also in Auschwitz. And they too must be honored and never forgotten. They deserve their own commemoration days and gatherings. Also, innocent bystanders, civilian fatalities deserve their commemoration dates. But please, don't mix it in with the Holocaust Remembrance Day. That can only be a protest against the Holocaust and the ongoing local and international anti-Semitism. Good morning to Zalman Weg. Good morning to you, to Mordechai, Baron Sudden. I'm sharing the wonderful people who are listening to us and watching us. And here's a wave to those who are embarrassed to give me their names on Facebook. But welcome. We have Mordechai all the way from Offenbach in Germany, and Jean Marie, and everybody out there on the radio. Really appreciate it. So Judaism can be summed up as a totality of beliefs and practices that were given to us by God and recorded in the Torah, and subsequent sacred writings of the Talmud and the Kabbalah. And there are so many things that people believe about Judaism which are either untrue or just partially untrue, or partially true, I should say. And there are many. I could spend the entire program just talking about the persistent myths about Judaism and the Jewish people. So I'm just going to address maybe one today. There's a myth out there that the Jewish God has a long beard and has a European accent. Many Jewish people, and probably non-Jewish as well, children grow up with the image of God being an old man with a long white beard, peering down from some jewel-encrusted throne in the sky, keeping tabs on our deeds and rewarding accordingly. Perhaps taking its cue from the archetypal, typical rabbi or cantor of previous generations, seen as God's de facto gatekeepers, or this fantasy further imposes that a Yiddish accent onto this imagery, Father in heaven. So that's an absolute, myth. God has no form. Last week we discussed a little bit, and there was a tremendous response to this conversation, whether God is male or female, or it, or they. Well, in the third of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith is that God has no form. In fact, he is entirely beyond time and space, which he himself created. So imagining him looking in a certain way and being in a certain place is wrong. God is entirely beyond anything we can possibly imagine, including gender. On the topic of God's non-gender, many people would be surprised to learn that according to Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, God connects with us in both masculine and feminine modalities. After all, God is both beyond all things and within all things. In the totally transcendent and lofty mode, God is called Him. In the thoroughly immanent, nurturing, life-giving mode, God is called Shekhinah, which is feminine and means indwelling. So, a little bit about that. I want to say good morning to Lynn Feldman and to Patty Fuchs. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to digress for a moment to let you know that this coming Wednesday on the calendar is the 10th day of Shvat. And that date marks an important event that took place 70 years ago, when Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, of righteous memory, assumed the leadership of the Chabad Lubavitch movement after the passing of his father-in-law, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok Schneerson, of righteous memory. And this Wednesday marks the date when the previous Rebbe passed in 1950. Approximately a year later, on that very date, the Rebbe assumed the leadership of the Chabad movement. And in the decades that followed, the Rebbe revolutionized, inspired, and guided the post-Holocaust transformation of the Jewish people that continues to this very day. So this day is so relevant to every one of us in our generation to learn and to reflect by by learning, through prayer, and through positive resolutions and acts of loving kindness to continue this living legacy of the Rebbe. I want to share with you something of what the Rebbe spoke about at the beginning of his leadership in terms of mission statement. And I would put it this way. If you want to love God, you need to love people. I know that most people have fallen off their chairs when you hear that. If you want to love God, you need to love people. Love of God, love of the Torah, love of depth in life are bound up with one another. So much so, they're really all one. Only when you love your fellow as yourself are you able to love God, who transcends the world and is the master of all things. For this reason, the Rebbe relinquished his own physical and even spiritual interests and dedicated himself to all of us. If you have love of God, but not love of the Torah and love of people, you actually are lacking in the love of God. On the other hand, if you love people, you will ultimately come to love God as well. Another important aspect of the Rebbe's mission statement: your purpose is far more profound than you think. The Zohar teaches us that there is a depth within depth. There is a revealed and the hidden, and within the hidden is concealed yet deeper purpose. And the Rebbe gifted people with various kinds of missions. Some of us were instructed to engage in a trade or in commerce. But the inner intention was to advance the world in a holy way, to bring depth, vision, observance. Others were instructed to become spiritual educators, disseminators of Judaism, or simply teach children the alphabet. We must all realize that these are all but external garments. Some are wonderful listeners and are doctors, and that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, these are external garments for a much more profound vision. The deeper vision, of course, is to bring the world to its ultimate redemption, where everyone lives in peace and with depth and understanding of our relationship with God and with humanity. The idea of helping people both physically and spiritually is also part of the reason why we're on this world. Each of us are asked to emulate our forefather Abraham. When arriving in a place where people didn't know too much about God, didn't know about it, Abraham put himself aside. His priority was to see that even people who would ultimately go out into the streets, they should be able to go out there and appreciate that this is God's world, seeing the godliness. And our relationship with each other is not just on a physical level, helping each other physically, but also helping a person spiritually as well. And one final thought before we get into, can God make a create a rock that he can't lift up, is that each of us must appreciate, well, this is really one of the highlights of the Rebbe's perspective, each of us are in the driver's seat. We can't leave it to anybody else, can't rely on anybody else. Each person has the responsibility in his or her life to make a difference in this world. It's not for this group or that guy or this lady, it's all of us. We each, in our own way, in our own communities, in our own zip code, so to speak, can make a difference for the entire world. So with that in mind, it's important for us to appreciate this date. The date on Wednesday is not just simply sitting around saying L'chaim, but each person spends the day. We treat it like a personal yahrzeit. We light a yahrzeit candle. We study a Mishnah. We remind ourselves of impacting the world the way the Rebbe taught us from his own example. And one of the stories we shared is the fact that on Sundays, as many know from the year 1986, for many years the Rebbe would stand on Sunday morning and distribute dollar bills. Men and women, Jewish, non-Jewish, everybody would come by and have an opportunity to receive this dollar. Its purpose, of course, was to help. The Rebbe was encouraging us to help others, to give charity. When two people come together, a third person should be helped, and an opportunity for blessings. So there was an elderly lady who had to wait quite a while. The Rebbe himself ended up that day, maybe 6 hours or so, standing on his feet, distributing these dollar bills. So when it was her turn, she said, Rebbe, why do you have to stand there yourself? Aren't you getting tired? I got tired just standing here 1.5 hours waiting for this opportunity. You're standing all these hours. Why can't you have some of your assistants distribute dollars? And the Rebbe said like this, when you are counting diamonds, you never get tired. If all of us would appreciate that other human beings are diamonds, there wouldn't be any problems out there. It's when everybody thinks of themselves differently, and whatever it is, that we have trouble, we have problems. So let's use this coming Wednesday an opportunity for us to strengthen these ideas of seeing and living in an atmosphere of respect and love and appreciation. Appreciate that the fact that everybody is the same. Appreciate people where they're at, and be a good example yourself. If you are a good example, not getting angry about certain things or whatever it may be, then we can certainly have a much bigger and important impact on people around us. And now let's go to our main subject of the day, and that is the concept of the can God create a rock that he can't lift? Interesting. Maybe I should give you a little bit of a summary so you get this, and then we'll go into more details. There are many Jewish philosophers concluded that God's omnipotence means that he can do anything that is physically impossible, but he can't do that which is logically impossible. God is not considered lacking in any way for being unable to do what is beyond the divine sphere of possibility. I will also share with you what Jewish mysticism says about this. And finally, an understanding from the Hasidic perspective of how to look at this, how to understand if God can create a rock that he can't lift. So let's dive right into it. In our previous lessons, I hinted today, we spoke about God's relationship with the world. We spoke about whether God is a he or a she or an it or a they. And we came to appreciate that God is beyond these terms. God is the one who created male and female. And we generally speak of God in masculine terms in appreciation of understanding that we are the recipients of God's blessings at all times. So on tap for today, can God create a rock that he can't lift? This philosophical paradox, by the way, in many different versions, has been discussed by Jewish philosophers for centuries. There are actually two different aspects to this question, or two different ways of framing the same idea. I'm going to first give you examples that relate to creation. For example, can God cause a person to travel both north and south at the same time? Can he make a person board the train and remain on the platform at the same time? Can he win a chess match in one move while following the rules of the game? Can God make 2 + 2 = 5? I know some accountants who can. Can he fit an elephant through the eyes of a needle without expanding the eye or shrinking the elephant? A second example, examples that relate to God. For example, can God replicate himself and yet still be one? Can he limit himself and still be infinite? Can he make himself unable to do something and still be omnipotent? Can he create a rock that he can't lift? So this is the question. In your estimation, does God's omnipotence imply that he can accomplish feats that are logically impossible? So let me first share with you the rationalistic response to this question. Most of the Jewish philosophers of Middle Ages concluded that God's omnipotence means that he can do anything that is physically impossible. He can split seas, he can cause bread to fall from the sky, he can create something from nothing, he can resurrect the dead, but he can't do that which is logically impossible. Just from a little, little joke, dear friends. Little Joey knocked on his neighbor's door. "I think you have something of mine in your garage," Joey said. The neighbor opened the garage door and noticed two new additions, a baseball and a broken window sporting a baseball-sized hole. "How do you suppose this ball got in here?" he asked. Taking one look at the ball, one look at the window, and one look at the neighbor, Joey explained, "Wow, I must have thrown it right through that hole." So, again, there are those who hold in the philosophical rationalistic response that God can do anything that is physically impossible. But he cannot do that which is logically impossible. 2 plus 2 can't equal 5. Period. Similarly, a person can't simultaneously riding a horse and not be riding a horse. An elephant can't climb through the eye of a needle unless the former shrinks or the latter expands. It is not a limitation on God's omnipotence to say that he can't make logically impossibilities happen. And to quote from Maimonides, the inability to accomplish something that is beyond one's sphere does not constitute imperfection. We would not call someone weak if they are unable to lift 60 tons. So too, we do not consider God to be imperfect because he can't transform himself into a body. Maimonides doesn't mean to say that a human lifting 60 tons is an inherent oxymoron. What he means to say that is just as we don't call someone weak for being unable to lift up that which is beyond the human sphere, so too we do not think of God as lacking in a way for being unable to do what was beyond the divine sphere of possibility. When we say so-and-so is strong, let's call him Barry. When we say so-and-so is strong, we don't mean that he can lift the Empire State Building. His inability to do so doesn't make him weak because it is beyond the human sphere. Similarly, inherent oxymorons are beyond the realm of what we mean by the word omnipotence. Therefore, to say that God is not omnipotent because he can't replicate himself or because he can't make 2 plus 2 equal 5 makes as much sense as saying that a human being is weak because he can't lift up the Empire State Building. So to summarize this, many Jewish philosophers concluded that God's omnipotence means that he can do anything that is physically impossible, but he can't do that which is logically impossible. God is not considered lacking in any way for being unable to do what is beyond the divine sphere of possibility. Now let me share with you the mystical response. This rationalistic response assumes that everything about God must make sense to the rational human mind. If a feat is logically or mathematically impossible, God can't be faulted for being unable to accomplish it. The Jewish mystics disagreed with this line of thinking. While the rationalists thought that existence is hemmed in by what is possible, the mystics, argued that this places a great limitation on God. It confines God to that which is possible, and God can't be confined. As the Rashba, Reb Shlomo ben Ideret, explains, it is clear that beliefs that we have are rooted in our tradition, and those that are sourced in prophetic revelations cannot be falsified by logic. The truth is that no one would deny a truth that is accepted on faith, unless he was of those who deny the possibility of anything that is naturally or physically impossible. The mystics argue that God, who created human logic, is the architect of his constraints, not its prisoner. So back to our original question. The rationalist says that it's impossible for God to make a rock that he can't lift. The mystic says that God is unconstrained by the limitations of human logic. He can do not only the impossible, but also the unthinkable. So to summarize this, Jewish mysticism argues that God, who created human logic, is the architect of its constraints, not its prisoner. He can do not only the impossible, but also the unthinkable. So I want to share with you how there's a harmonizing approach that comes from the Hasidic perspective. The Hasidic masters, they come down on the side of the mystics. What do I mean? Just because something is impossible for a finite human to conceive doesn't make it impossible for God to conceive it. However, Hasidus does not deny the rationalistic position either. God chose to create a universe that operates in a logical manner. Therefore, as God, I quote, so to speak, descends to create and operate this logical universe, he confines himself to the constraints of logic. In this state of self-imposed restraint, the philosophers are correct to say that God can't make a rock that he can't lift. Basically, God lives by the rules that he himself made, but he's not a prisoner to them. To add to this, all the rules of logic, this is from the Rebbe himself, all the rules of logic were created by God. It follows that he, who created these rules, is not constrained by them. God forbid. As we mentioned just before from the Rashba. When certain Jewish philosophers claim that some impossibilities are impossible even for God, they were referring to God as he chooses to confine himself to the rules of logic. So until now, we had a conundrum. The rationalists had a constraining view of God. The mystics had an expansive view of God. Along comes Hasidus and demonstrates that both can be correct. God is inherently unconstrained, but he has chosen to constrain himself within the laws that he himself has created. Understandably, however, anytime God chooses to, he can revert to this transcendent state and create something that is mathematically and logically impossible. In this transcendent state, the Rashba is correct to say that God can do anything, even if it is beyond the realm of possibility. So again, I would summarize this. The Hasidic masters explain that God chose to create a universe that operates in a logical manner. As God descends to create and operate this logical universe, he confines himself to what we see as constraints of logic. However, anytime God chooses, he can revert to his transcendent state and create something that is logically impossible. We introduce the question of whether God can do that which is logically impossible in two ways. We gave the examples in relation to creation and examples that related to God. And I'd like to kind of round this up by discussing examples of God doing both of these impossibilities. One of the examples that is well known to those who live in Connecticut, the Holy Ark, the Aron, which contained the tablets, sat in the holies of holies in the holy temple. Its length was 2.5 cubits, and sat in the holies of holies, which was 20 cubits by 20 cubits. Yet, if you measured from the ark, from the Aron to the left wall, there were 10 cubits. If you measured from the same ark to the right wall, you would also find 10 cubits. So the Talmud tells us the Aron, it occupied space, It had the precise biblical dimensions of 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5 cubits, and at the same time, it did not occupy any space. The ark demonstrated how, if God chooses, he can defy even that which is logically impossible. Now let me talk about an example of God limiting himself. There's actually an example of a rock that God created that he can't lift. In fact, there isn't just one such example. There are millions. Every day, they walk the streets of every city in the world, and one such example stares at you every time you look at the mirror. Yes, you guessed it. You are that rock. Every creature in the universe is under God's control, from the sun to the gnat, from quantum physics to nuclear physics. Every moment, every motion, cause and effect is determined by God. Clearly, none of them are too heavy for him to lift. We humans, though, are one exception to this rule. We, as it were, control our own destiny, because as we've learnt and we all know, God has endowed human beings with free will. God chose to create a wild card, so to speak, that has the ability to defy his will. He actually chose to make himself powerless and incapable of controlling, so to speak, lifting, you may say, this outlier. In simple words, God created you and me, but he can't lift you or me. We need to lift ourselves. Very, very powerful and important ideas. So to summarize, 2 examples I've given you of God doing things that are logically impossible. The ark in the Holies of Holies simultaneously occupied space and did not occupy space. And number 2, God created humans but cannot control them due to the free choice that he has granted each and every one of us. So, a summary of our conversation would be like this. While many Jewish philosophers concluded that God's omnipotence means that he can do anything that is physically impossible, but he can't do that which is logically impossible. God is not considered lacking in any way of being unable to do what is beyond the divine sphere of possibility. Jewish mysticism argues that God, who created human logic, is the architect of all these constraints, but not its prisoner. He cannot only do the impossible, but also the unthinkable. The Hasidic masters explain that God chose to create a world that operates in a logical manner. And as God descends to operate this logical world, he confines himself to the constraints of logic. However, anytime God chooses, he can revert to his transcendent state and create something that is logically impossible. And we gave 2 examples that are logically impossible, that we find that the ark in the temple simultaneously had its occupied space, but did not occupy at the same time. It did not occupy space. And number 2, God has created all of us, humans, but cannot control them due to the free choice that he has granted them. I want to really thank the wonderful comments coming in now on Facebook, and those listening, thank you so much. I know that this would bring up a lot of thought and something to think about, but just wanted to lay it out and share with you of the different possibilities of how to look at this question and to appreciate the importance given to a human being in terms of our freedom of choice. And that perhaps can help those who have problems who are understanding the evil in this world. That is an absolute choice by the individual who, instead of using his or her abilities to uplift the world, spends too much time putting other people down. And that is their doing and nobody else's in so many different ways. Let's I'd like to round up our program today to once again to address an important aspect of the Rebbe. As I pointed out, this Wednesday is Yud Shvat, the 10th day of Shvat, the day when the Rebbe became the Rebbe. And I want to share with you through the eyes of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of England, in his own words, how he saw the Rebbe. And he said the following. He said like this: "We met," he's talking about his meeting the Rebbe in 1968. At that point, he was an undergraduate visiting American Jewry to seek out its intellectual leaders. They were impressive, but he shares that his encounter with the Rebbe was unique. In every other case, I asked questions. When he went to see other leaders, he asked a question, they received an answer. The Lubavitch Rebbe alone turned the interview around and began to ask me questions, and asked him, what am I doing for Jewish life in Cambridge? What am I doing to promote Jewish identity with my fellow students? The challenge was personal and unmistakable. I then realized that was remarkable about the Rebbe was the exact opposite of what was usually attributed to him. This was not a man who was interested in creating followers. Instead, this was a man who was passionate about creating leaders. He himself was the leader on an heroic scale, chosen to succeed his late father-in-law as head of Chabad in 1950. He set about reconstructing the movement in this inhospitable climate of secular America. At that time, it was widely believed that Judaism had no future in America. No one had yet found a way to make traditional Judaism a living presence in America. Like all classic rabbinic leaders, the Rebbe began with education, creating networks of schools. Then he took the decision that would change the face of Chabad and ultimately the Jewish world. He sent followers to places and communities which had never known a Hasidic presence. He began with university campuses. Already in the early 1950s, Lubavitchers could be found working with Jewish students, telling Hasidic stories, singing songs, introducing them to the remote world of Jewish mysticism. It was an extraordinary move, nothing less than the reinvention of the early days of what going back to the 18th century, where the followers of the Baal Shem Tov traveled from village to village, taking with them the message of piety and faith. So Hasidism had proved to be the most effective way to protect Judaism against all the inroads of other secularizations. But it was limited in its impact to Eastern Europe. We talk about all the way back then. Nothing was less likely than that a strategy from the old world could succeed in the United States. But it did. Drawn by its warmth, intrigued by its depth, we see how the Rebbe's teachings have, and through his disciples, have now impacted the whole world. The second decision, says the former chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Sachs, was even more remarkable. Though the faith that drove the Rebbe was traditional, the environment to which it was addressed was not. Earlier and more profoundly than any other Jewish leader, he realized that modern communications was transforming the world into a global village. Religious leadership could now be exercised on a scale impossible before. The Rebbe began sending emissaries throughout the world. This movement was unified through his regular addresses, communicated through a series of mitzvah campaigns. Few international organizations could be more tightly led by a single individual on a most slender resource. It would be hard to find a historical precedent for this massive effort to reignite the flame of Judaism in a secular world. If today we are familiar with the phenomenon of Balei Tshuva, religious returnees, Jewish outreach, it is almost entirely due to the pioneering work of the Rebbe that now has since been adopted by many other groups. The Rebbe, preoccupied by the challenge of religious leadership, he expressed his concern of the shortage of rabbis throughout the diaspora. He encouraged, the Rebbe encouraged the chief rabbi, even at that point in 1968, to enter into rabbinics, to train other rabbis, and he was particularly supportive of the work of what is known in England as the Jews' College. He himself turned his followers into leaders at the earliest possible age, and if decision to empower youth exposed the individual to risks, it also gave it a vigor and an energy that were to be found nowhere else in the religious world, where young people started out in communities far and wide. So my friends, as we think about this coming week and this coming Wednesday and all the subject matter that I'm sharing with you today that comes from the teachings, the insight of the Rebbe, we can appreciate that we are living at unprecedented times where we have the opportunity, through kindness, through acts of goodness and kindness, through learning, through appreciation, respect, we can turn this world into an extraordinary, important world. This is your host, Rabbi Perl, wishing you a wonderful week. Stay safe, and we will continue these conversations in coming times. Shalom, and stay safe.